Hello, everyone. Welcome to the webinar series. Today, we're going to talk about green building rating systems and the relevance in the Indian context. You are probably familiar with green buildings, or maybe you find it intriguing, and so you're here to learn more about it. There is a lot of buzz around rating systems. They are not new, but they've been around for a while, and yet there is generally a lot of debate around rating systems and equal amount of curiosity. So I'm going to be giving you a very high level overview of the different rating systems that are used in India, and also a little history of where they're coming from and where they are sort of headed to in the future. My name is Deepa. I lead the sustainability education services at Environmental Design Solutions. I'm an architect with a background in building science. I have 10 years of consulting experience, working on high performance building, including net zero building and a lot of whole building energy simulations, daylight analysis, and so on. I also conduct and curate a lot of capacity building and training programs. And I try to, my whole endeavor in whatever work I do is to try and bridge the gap between theory and practice, and making sure that the buildings that we, or that I am a part of, kind of shapes the future built environment in a positive way. So that's a little bit about me, and now we'll uh, give you a little introduction about EDS, and then I'll jump into the topic. EDS, as an Environmental Design Solutions, is a consulting firm. The work is focused on buildings, built environment at large. This is just a snapshot of our office in Delhi, in India. EDS was established in 2003. We are a team of 65 plus professionals and have completed over 400 plus projects. Our team comprises of architects and engineers, and we call ourselves built environment professionals, and we work on everything from high performance building consulting to building certification facilitation, to HVAC design, and to capacity building and education services. So here I am going to talk to you about green building ratings. This is something we work on a day-to-day basis at different capacity in our consulting work. So I want to just start with, overall kind of talking about buildings, right? This is all about buildings that we're going to talk about. In general, buildings are resource intensive, whether they are good buildings, bad buildings, great buildings, or whatever kind of building. In general, they are resource intensive, right? There is lots of materials that go into building them. Uh, Energy, it takes energy to build buildings, it takes water during construction, and so on. And also during the operational lifetime, there's a lot of output in terms of waste, uh, solid waste and wastewater, air pollution, and so on. So this is the nature of construction and buildings in general. Now, what green buildings aim to do is to reduce the negative impact. So the impact is there. Can we reduce the negative impact? That is the aim of green buildings. And yes, it's possible to do that. Now, the concept of green buildings, right? That's not new. I'm sure you all know that. If we look at vernacular examples or old settlements from history, then we know that we always knew how to build buildings that keep people safe and also comfortable, right? In terms of the indoor environments, whether it's temperature, humidity, and so on. Whether it's India or even across the world, we see so many examples, which is a testament to the fact that we always knew how to design buildings, and by default, these buildings were green. Now, what we understand as green is probably has evolved over time. So here are examples that you can see: very climate responsive, Look and feel is different using locally available materials and technology, and culture and so on, right? Now, over time, we have access to newer technology and newer materials. And so, clearly, the way we will design buildings in the recent past and going forward is not going to be the same like how we used to build buildings maybe 200 years back. So, that is a fact that is known to us. What is also known to us is that the way we've been designing these buildings, like some of the pictures that is shown here, they probably, if I take away the names, they you wouldn't know where exactly they are located unless there is some building which is very iconic and stark, and you can pinpoint the location. So we know the impact of these buildings in terms of what we've discussed before, the energy it uses over the operational lifetime of a building, the impact it has on heat island, and overall on climate change. And so this is a well-known fact, and I'm not going to reiterate that uh, buildings are one of the problems and also one of the key solutions to combat climate change. And so getting it right is very important. So, what green buildings aim to do is reduce this negative impact, right? So, here, this is some of the potential that green buildings are able to achieve in terms of, like around 11% reduction in water use, 19% reduction in maintenance cost, 25% in energy use, and 34% reduction in CO2 emissions. Just some of the metrics to give you an idea. So it's possible to reduce the negative impact, and we can stop building the buildings that we are building, have been in the recent past, to shift towards what used to be called climate responsive. But how do we do that in the present day and time when we have access to so many different kind of materials and technology? The definition of green does not have to be buildings that look like they've been made out of uh, you know stone or mud, or look like they don't belong in a city, for example. Sometimes those cliches exist in our mind and we feel that those are the kind of buildings which are called green, which we see the vernacular examples that we saw. But that's not true. And because it's not true, there is a lot of confusion around what is a green building. How does a green building really look? Can we define green buildings? What are the metrics that make a building green? And so on. So there is a rapidly increasing demand to create a formal system for defining green buildings, right? Is it a building that only uses stone and mud? Is it a building that has to look in a certain way? Is it a building that has to have certain things in place? What is it, right? And that's what rating systems help achieve, that it is a system or a guideline to verify that a building is green. So it's a set of criteria which is given to a builder or a designer or owner, which when they follow, it helps bring, it helps verify that their building is green. It gives a definition of a common baseline, right? Of what is considered green. So if you compare different buildings across the same rating system, then you know that you're defining that you can compare across the same baseline. So there is some kind of a commonality which green building rating systems provide. Further, it's also an assessment tool because it's a rating. So you're kind of rating, right? You're kind of measuring against certain baseline. So it's an assessment tool. And as we move on, we'll understand which are the criteria in which green features are, assessed. And finally, to recognize environmental stewardship. This is also very important, where if where clients or owners are recognized for their efforts to showcase environmental stewardship, right? It does talk about their commitment to environment and their efforts are recognized, which is also a very motivating aspect in taking that extra step towards making sure that the building is really green. Now, the goal of all rating system is ultimately market transformation. This is really important, right? majority of the buildings are probably following typical building practices, and they are not really, you can't call them like sustainable or green. Whereas rating systems are pushing the market. So, you move from a business as usual typical practice to a green building market where there is a demand for green building uh, attributes, right? And that's what rating systems have successfully managed to do over the years and are continuing to do that. Now, an example is like life safety. 100 years back, buildings probably didn't have life safety codes in place. But today, it's kind of unthinkable, right, to have a building which does not have fire suppression systems, for example, in place. It's a given. Just like that, many green attributes become business as usual and is a given. Over time, this is a market shift that happens, and rating systems make sure this shift happens rapidly, right? So they increase the pace of this shift. And by doing that, rating systems have helped make several industry best practices become mainstream. A good example of this is, using materials with recycled content. A decade back, probably it was a little bit of an effort to find out such materials which would have recycled content in them and also have the supporting documentation. Today, we've moved beyond it, and we are talking about embodied energy, and we're talking about EPDs and LCAs for materials. So this is an example of how it's probably mainstream now to use wood which has recycled content, for example. So no one is going to really ask you about that. So it's become mainstream. Now, rating systems are used all over the world. It's a global phenomenon. And globally, rating systems have ensured market transformation in different parts of the world. Sometimes rating systems are very specific to a country. For example, we have Griha in India, or Green Star in Australia. Uh, but on the other hand, there are also rating systems like LEED, for example, LEED, which is used all over the world, or maybe like a BREEAM or a passive house, which again is probably not as popular as LEED, but is seeing a lot of uptake in various parts of the world. Now let's talk about a little bit the movement in India, the green building movement. It started with the establishment of the Indian Green Building Council in 2001, right? Now we are in 2021. It's been 2 decades since IGBC was established. And this marked the green building movement in India. At that time, this flagship building was built. This is the CII Godrej Green Business Center in Hyderabad in India. This aerial view is the latest picture. So they've gone through a lot of retrofits, right? It's a 20-year-old building now. Technologies have changed. Now they have, now this is a net zero building. So at that time, this building was the greenest platinum rated building in India, and it set the it flagged off the green building movement, I can say. So if you wanted to look at a model green building at the time, contemporary building, then this was the answer. So it had all the green building best practices possible integrated into this project. So in that sense, it's very iconic, this building. So that was the start of the green building movement. Now, at that time, USGBC and IGBC had a partnership. And so the rating systems were called Lead India New Construction and Lead India so and so. Further, in 2014, IGBC became independent. And then in 2007, shortly after IGBC was established, we also had the launch of Griha rating system by TERI, that is the Energy and Resources Institute. So you had the IGBC, which is the governing body for the IGBC suite of rating systems now, and then it was Lead India. And then Griha was like this indigenous rating system developed. It was this made in India rating system, I can say. So as on today, we have the primarily three kind of rating systems being used: the IGBC suite of rating systems. You also have USGBC suite of rating systems. It's not just lead, but it's also well, and a few other things, but the lead and well are more common and prevalent than the others. And third is Griha. There are few others like GEM and so on, but by far these three are the most prevalent rating systems in India. Now let's start with LEED. LEED, or Leadership in Energy and Environment Design, is the most widely used green building rating system in the world. It has presence in 165 countries and territories, and it is developed by the United States Green Building Council. Right now, LEED rating systems are there for different kind of building types, whether it's new construction or existing buildings, or interior design and construction, that is for tenant occupied spaces, lead for homes, or lead for neighborhood development. So these are different types of rating system for distinctly for distinct building types. Whereas IGBC also has its suite of rating systems for different buildings, like homes and existing building and new building, schools and factory, and you can see the whole list over here. Now, Griha doesn't have such an exhaustive list, but depending on the size of the project, you have different rating systems. So Griha itself is for all new buildings, which is greater than 2,500 square meters. For smaller buildings, they have Swagriha, and then for large master plans, they have Griha LD, or large development, and then housing, and so on. Now, since it's a rating system, there are certification levels. For LEED and IGBC, you have certified silver, gold, and platinum. These are the four levels of rating systems. And for Griha, you have star rating. And now all these three ratings are all point-based systems. And over a score of 100, you score, and depending on the number of points you score, you can get either certified or gold and platinum levels. And similarly for star rating, depending on the number of points that you score for the project. And then you also have professionals, which are green building professionals, right? Like LEED professionals who help in, just a second. Yeah. These professionals help projects achieve certification. They guide a project team in how to go about meeting the requirement in the specific rating system. So you can see for LEED, it's a 3-tier system of professional credentials, starting with Green Associate, and then LEED Accredited Professional, or LEED AP, for different specialties depending on the rating system, and finally LEED Fellow. Right? So rating systems are, what I want to say is that they are not only creating a demand for green buildings, but also skilled professionals. Similar requirements exist for IGBC, where there is an IGBC accredited professional, right? And for Griha, you have Griha certified professionals, Griha trainers, and Griha evaluators. So all of these professionals are knowledgeable about the rating system, and they help facilitate the process. Now, if we look at the credit categories that is covered in each of the rating, now here I just want to throw some light on, at the end of the day, they are all very similar. Whether it's IGBC or LEED or Griha, the structure may be slightly different, but they address largely things like, the design of the building. So you can see in IGBC on the left, there are categories in the rating system. For example, new building, a rating system that addresses architecture and design of the building, site selection and planning, water conservation, energy efficiency, building materials and resources, indoor environment quality, and innovation and development. On the other hand, the right side that you see, Grihide, also looks at site planning. It looks at energy and water and materials, and also uh, you know indoor environment quality in terms of occupant comfort and well-being, right? So at a high level, they all address the same aspects about a building design, construction, and occupancy. In lead, it's called core concepts, and again, lead addresses location, site, water, energy, material, and indoor environment quality, right? So in a nutshell, rating systems address both design, construction, and operations and maintenance of a building. It's the whole cycle. But there is a lot of emphasis on design, especially for a new building rating. Now, whether it's a new building of any kind, whether it's a home or a interior design and construction, or an entire new building, design is has a big focus, right? This sets the tone for the rest, like sets the direction for the rest of the 30, 40, 50 years of occupancy of the building, and it is the root cause of a lot of environmental issues. A bad design will remain a bad design all its life, and no matter how much of a good technology you have in the building, it's only an add on, right? It's like a good technology is like a band aid to a bad design. So you have to get the design really, really correct. And so, a lot of emphasis of rating system is on getting the design right, right from site selection to site planning, landscape, how the building is designed, the materials are selected, the way the daylight is in the building, thermal comfort, and so on and so forth. And of course, there is some emphasis on the construction aspect, and then what happens to building after it is occupied. And the measurement of the green, right, the degree of green of a building is both qualitative and quantitative. Not everything can be measured, right? You can measure water savings, energy savings, but something like a daylight is more qualitative, although you can measure absolute daylight levels. But glare control is a more qualitative aspect, as an example. So rating system does address both. uh, I mean, it has criteria that will measure both qualitative and quantitative metrics. So in a nutshell, green buildings provide long-term social, environmental, and financial benefits. Right. So social, environmental, and financial. So that is the triple bottom line of sustainability. Green buildings or anything to be sustainable, that is why the word long term, it has to address the three pillars, that is people, planet, and profit, or human health, economy, and the environment. So as long as it's addressing the three pillars of sustainability, it will have a positive impact on the environment. It will be truly sustainable, we can say. The other benefits is like green building performance improves with time because there are mechanisms in place for monitoring and verification of a building's performance over its lifetime. So a building will eventually, over the years, will perform better and hence will save more energy and reduce greenhouse gas emissions over time. Now, having said that, there are some limitations of rating systems as well. Starting with, it could be expensive. Now, you may want to remember that all rating systems are voluntary, they're not mandatory. So, projects that aspire to be certified, or those who go for these rating systems, they have some aspiration or maybe probably a requirement in place. So, it is really a voluntary um, uh, decision taken by any project team, and there is an expense to it. You have to pay the certification and the registration and the certification fee, so it comes at a cost. So sometimes it could be expensive, and there could be budgetary constraints. It could also happen that a project team is only driven by scoring points, and the motivation to truly make the building green may or may not be there. Sometimes, depending on which rating system it is, there can be a lack of you know regular and consistent updates. And sometimes it's so technical that you could need specialized skills, and that calls for certain professionals uh, on the team, right? And that also would mean that there is an additional consultant on board, and the rating system will call for more additional paperwork, right? It is also perceived as complex and technical, which could be sometimes a deterrent to adopt or look into a rating system. uh, there is no occupant engagement, right? This is really something that speaks to a design team, and the occupants sort of rarely know that they are in a green building, or rather what to expect from a green building. On the other hand, the ratings for existing buildings, that speaks to the people who operate the building and not exactly those who are like a daily users of the building. And yes, it largely addresses new construction, uh, which has been kind of taken care of now in the rating systems, the way they are evolving. So, that's sort of the last point I had kept there, that, it is a limitation, but not that big a limitation. So that's where it brings me to this kind of timeline. I really like this graphic. It shows the green building movement or the journey in the first 25 years. The first rating system that was launched was BREEAM in 1990. This was launched in the UK. And then US Green Building Council was launched in 1993, right? So as such, we are looking at a 3 decade of a journey of overall building, green building rating systems. So they have gone through certain evolution over time, right? So uh, this is like a tried and tested and a continuously evolving mechanism which is out there, and it also has had a widely accepted. Um, it has been widely accepted in the industry. So you can see here in 1993 is where USGBC was established, and then LEED was launched in 1998, and just 2 years, 3 years later, in 2001, is when Indian Green Building Council was formed. So you remember, right? We just talked about it. So that means 10 years, around 10 years after the first rating system was launched, the Indian Green Building Council was launched. Around the same time, the CASB rating system in Japan was launched. And if you move further, in 2004, the lead for existing building was introduced, right? Until then, it was all about the new buildings. And then some of the more significant things are like in 2006, Living Building Challenge was launched. This is a separate rating system, and by far the most stringent out there, with requirements that really pushes the um, project team to think beyond the obvious and really pushing the envelope. To let's go move on to 2010, when Green Globes was launched. And then if you move on to uh, 2014, then you have LEED is used in more than 140 countries. So clearly, as a movement, there is more acceptance to a rating system like LEED. And finally, in 2016, LEED version 4 uh, became mandatory. So the newer version. So you started with version 1 in 1998, and then in 2016 it came out with version 4, right? So in this whole evolution of 3 decade of rating systems having been there in the industry, um, the trend is moving from doing less bad, that's how it started, to doing more good. What it means is it's not enough anymore to say that my building is 30% better than an average building. That's not enough. It's been 3 decades, and we have to move beyond that. It's all about how the building is doing more good. So an example of that is, uh, rather than saying it is 30% more energy efficient than a baseline, it's about asking whether the building is energy positive, right? It's not much about diverting 50% of waste from landfill, but it's about saying, is this a zero waste facility? What can be done? What can be done to achieve that? It's less about having a native landscape and more about restoring biodiversity, right? It's less about having just good light versus what is the impact on occupant health and wellness. What's the air quality in a building? What is the the color rendering index of the light fixtures and so on. So this is what it means by moving from doing less bad to more good. And this is a great shift, right? In not just the approach of rating systems, but also in the mindset of those adopting these rating systems. Like I said, it still continues to be voluntary as a system. And this is where rating systems are headed now. So there is IGBC net zero rating today. I showed you the classic flagship building of India, which is the CII Business Center, which is, as on today, it's a IGBC net zero rated building, right? They've had to do retrofit of glazing, put PV, on the rooftop, of course, add some insulation, retrofit the lighting, and so on, uh, to make it a net zero building. So it's a great example of, again, a retrofitting an existing building to get to net zero. There is also lead zero rating that looks at zero performance of energy, water, carbon, waste. IGBC is still looking at energy, but lead is addressing all the other aspects of a building. So that is where rating systems are headed now. Now we are talking about net zero goals for 2030, for 2040, 2050, and so on. So it's no more about percentage improvement in energy from a baseline. That is very, very yesterday. And rating systems will continue to accelerate the trend towards green buildings. They will continue to redefine what green buildings really mean over time, right? Like I said, moving from less bad to doing more good. And it will continue to be a force in uh, you know uh, we call it market transformation. It will continue to be that. And so the early adopters in the whole green building movement will be the one to uh, showcase environmental stewardship and also recognize the uh, advantages that such a building has on their own health, on the environment, and also on their bottom line. So, with that, I hope you have a good overview of rating systems and similarities between various systems and where they've come from and where they are headed. So, thank you so much for being a wonderful audience, and I'd like to take your questions now.
Thank you so much for taking us through a very insightful presentation, Architect Deepa. It was very interesting to understand the ratings and the timeline to such detail. So I have a few questions before we close.
Sure.
Is the payback period a concern for most of the builders? In any of the projects that you were involved in, was this an issue? And how do you manage to convince them in such cases?
Yeah, that's a great question. Yes, we do encounter this big question of payback. And generally it's, you can do the math and show them that this is the payback, but that is usually not a big concern when the team is already in the mindset of going green. It's usually a concern when the team is only probably looking at scoring some points, and then they want to make a case for an additional investment. And it usually happens when you want them to put some solar PVs, for example, on the rooftop. And that's where the ROI or the payback and all of that comes into play. And we have seen from our experience that if the building is designed properly from the very beginning with all the basic green building fundamentals in place, then the additional cost is probably in the range of 10 to 15%. That is, again, it's a range depending on what kind of technology you wish to have in the building. It's only when these things are an afterthought where the additional cost is a lot more, and hence the whole payback kind of conversations come into play. So that's what we've seen. You have to start in the, very early and get it right in the first place. Then payback is not an issue.
Right. So you've mentioned that assessments are done over a lifetime for buildings to compare with a business as usual structure. Should green assessments be made continuous? Should these continuous assessments be made compulsory so as to ensure that these buildings stay green, or is this something that the building owners or the proprietors take in themselves on their own?
Um, so if you see, the rating systems are focused more on design. So there, the operations part really don't come into play so much. You're designing the building so it's operated in a certain way, and hence you reap the benefits. Whereas those rating systems which focus on existing buildings, there's a complete mechanism in place where you will need to report the energy performance and a whole host of other criteria to USGBC, for example, if we talk about O&M rating on a yearly basis. So there you will be needing to show your performance if you go on the ARC platform. So there are mechanisms in place to do continuous monitoring and checking and reporting. Whereas those ratings which is just focused on design, there isn't any requirement as such. But if you ask me, then clearly there are systems in place, like they'll ask you to put sub meters in place. Now, if you have a sub meter in place, all you have to do is look into the data and improve your building performance over time. And this is what we tell the occupants, that this is how your bottom line would improve, right? So you are saving on the running cost of the building. You have all the systems in place to monitor the data. In fact, you will need to report to USGBC of your energy and water data. They're not asking any questions, but the whole idea is that if you are reporting, you have access to this data, and hence you should do something about it. Now, whether clients or people do something about it, it just varies across the board. Those who really are committed, they do it. Those who are not really committed, they don't do it. Whether it should be mandatory, I think it should be mandatory. I think there should be, like some kind of a labeling for existing buildings, which is also there, but some kind of a mandate in place where you have no choice but to actually pay attention to what's happening in the existing building in terms of performance. Yeah.
I'd like to thank you again on behalf of all of us at Glass Academy for sharing your thoughts today with us. There will be other questions that might come in from the audience, and I'll make sure that I send them across to you and we'll update them as soon as you reply to them. Thank you so much, Architect Deepa.
Thank you so much.